As we drift into the history of the Roman Empire, we embark on an extraordinary journey that spans over a millennium. The story of Rome is not just the tale of a city, it is the saga of a civilization that shaped the course of Western history, the echoes of which are still felt in our modern world. From humble beginnings along the banks of the Tiber River to ruling vast territories across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, the Roman Empire reached unparalleled heights of power, influence, and cultural achievement. The foundations of its political, military, and social systems would serve as a model for future empires, governments, and civilizations. The history of Rome is marked by its resilience, its ability to adapt, and the indelible marks it left on the cultures it encountered. But it was not a single story. It was many stories, woven together through the lives of remarkable emperors, generals, philosophers, poets, and citizens who lived in a world both brutal and brilliant. From the Roman Republic's fragile democratic roots to the immense authority of the imperial throne, Rome's evolution was as complex as it was transformative. We will examine not only the major events, battles, and leaders, but also the ordinary people who lived within the empire. Those whose daily lives, struggles, and dreams gave shape to the sprawling legacy of Rome. Rome's story is one of a civilization at once both ancient and enduring, with its influence seeping into the very fabric of law, architecture, language, and governance that many societies still use today. But behind this grandeur lay the realities of Roman society, its class divisions, struggles for power, and the constant threat of foreign invaders that kept the empire on its toes for centuries. The empire faced countless challenges, from internal strife and rebellion to the pressures of vast territorial expansion. And yet, it was in this crucible of conflict that the Roman identity was forged. This journey through the Roman Empire will be more than a recounting of dates and battles. It is an exploration of what made Rome tick, the cultural achievements, the philosophies, and the inventions that helped build a world that continues to inspire and intrigue. With every emperor who ascended to power, with every military victory, and with every new territory added to its realm, the Roman Empire proved time and again that it was a force to be reckoned with. But it was also a world full of contradictions, where opulence coexisted with poverty, where democracy and autocracy blended in an often uneasy harmony, and where the greatness of the empire was counterbalanced by the flaws inherent in such a vast and complex civilization. As we delve into the history of the Roman Empire, we will walk the streets of ancient Rome itself, where marble columns once lined grand forums, where orators made impassioned speeches, and where soldiers paraded in triumph after defeating distant enemies. We will explore the battlefields where legions clashed, and the majestic structures like the Colosseum and the Pantheon that still stand as reminders of the empire's grandeur. Yet we will also take a quiet stroll through the shadows of Roman life, the lives of those who built the empire's wealth and power, those whose stories often remain untold, but whose contributions were no less vital. Rome's story is not simply one of war and conquest. It is a narrative that reflects the complexity of human ambition, the pursuit of power, and the drive to create something lasting. From the rise of the Republic to the eventual fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century, we will explore how Rome's glory faded and how its legacy lived on in the eastern half of the empire, the Byzantine Empire, and in the countless civilizations it influenced. But as we will see, the Roman Empire was not a static entity. Its borders expanded and contracted, its form of government transformed, and its cultural influence spread far beyond the Mediterranean world. It is a history marked by adaptation, resilience, and the ongoing quest for greatness. A history that remains as relevant today as it was over 2,000 years ago. Through this exploration, we will encounter familiar names: Julius Caesar, Augustus, Nero, and Constantine. But we will also uncover the stories of lesser-known figures who shaped Rome in profound ways. We will witness the rise and fall of emperors, the triumphs of military campaigns, and the intellectual achievements that have influenced the course of Western thought. We will walk through the bustling streets of ancient cities, explore the grand temples and theaters, and listen to the echoes of history that resonate through Rome's impressive ruins. The Roman Empire's story is vast, stretching over centuries, continents, and cultures, yet its lessons are timeless. As we explore Rome's origins, its apex, and its eventual decline, we will not only gain insight into the past, but also reflect on how the legacy of this ancient empire continues to shape our world today. With this introduction, we set the stage for our journey through the entire history of the Roman Empire, inviting you to fall asleep to its unfolding story, an eternal tale of ambition, power, and the resilience of a civilization that continues to inspire and inform our understanding of history. The history of Rome begins not with grand armies or imperial palaces, but with myth and legend, from which the city's identity and values would be born. According to ancient stories, the city of Rome was founded in 753 BCE by the twin brothers Romulus and Remus. Their tale, steeped in divine intervention and the struggles of survival, is woven into the very fabric of Roman culture. Raised by a she-wolf in a cave called the Lupercal, the brothers embodied the rugged qualities of determination and resilience that would define Rome's future. Romulus the Elder eventually became the first king of Rome after a quarrel led to the tragic death of his brother. This myth, although steeped in legend, reflects the ethos that would drive Rome for centuries, the idea of overcoming adversity and fighting for survival. However, the story of Rome's origins goes beyond myth and touches upon a more practical history. Rome's founding as a settlement on the Palatine Hill in central Italy was not a singular event, but a gradual process of expansion. Situated strategically along the Tiber River, the early Romans took advantage of their location as a trade hub and a crossroads between the Etruscans to the north and the Greeks to the south. These early settlers were influenced by the civilizations surrounding them, and Rome's early development was marked by a blending of various cultures, from the Latins to the Etruscans, all of whom left their mark on the nascent city. In its early years, Rome was ruled by a series of kings, some of whom were of Latin and others of Etruscan origin. The Etruscans, in particular, played a crucial role in shaping early Roman society, bringing with them advancements in engineering, religious practices, and urban planning. The Etruscan kings helped to build the foundations of Rome's first public buildings, including the Forum, and the early Romans adopted many of their rituals and deities. As we drift through the early days of Rome, it's important to consider the nature of early Roman governance. The city's political structure began as a monarchy, with kings holding supreme power. However, Rome's rapid expansion and increasing wealth brought about changes. By the end of the 6th century BCE, the Romans had grown dissatisfied with their kings, particularly the tyrannical rule of the last king, Tarquin the Proud. His reign ended in 509 BCE when the Romans, in a moment of profound political shift, overthrew the monarchy and established a republic. This transition would prove to be one of the most defining moments in Roman history. The establishment of the Roman Republic marked a shift from monarchy to a system that emphasized shared power and the rule of law. It was a system in which power was distributed across elected officials and representative bodies, such as the Senate, which played an influential role in the governance of the Republic. The Roman Republic was characterized by its complex constitution, where various branches of government checked each other's power, and by the presence of both patricians, the aristocratic class, and plebeians, the common people, who had distinct roles and rights in society. This duality of class and power would be a recurring theme throughout Roman history. Rome's political system was not static. It was shaped and reshaped by wars, internal strife, and the ambitions of powerful individuals. As we turn the pages of history, we find that the Romans were always pragmatic in their approach to governance, willing to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining their core values. The Republic's political system allowed for the mixing of tradition with innovation, and it was in this system that Rome would grow from a small city-state to a power to be reckoned with in the Mediterranean world. In the early days of the Republic, Rome's territorial expansion was modest, but its military prowess would soon prove to be one of its greatest strengths. As Rome expanded, it would come into conflict with its neighbors, most notably the neighboring city of Veii. The Romans, known for their discipline and strategic thinking, succeeded in capturing Veii in 396 BCE, marking a significant military victory. This was a pivotal moment in Roman history, for it demonstrated Rome's ability to not only fight, but to endure the hardships of war and adapt its strategies to overcome more powerful enemies. The foundation of Roman military power was laid not just through conquest, but also through the establishment of alliances with neighboring peoples. The Romans had an innate ability to forge diplomatic relationships, often offering citizenship and local autonomy to conquered peoples in exchange for loyalty and support. This system of alliances allowed Rome to expand its influence without the need for constant direct control, enabling it to build a vast network of client states that would later serve as the backbone of its imperial power. As we move further into the evolution of the Roman Republic, we see how its political and military systems evolved in response to the challenges it faced. The Republic was constantly at war, either with its neighbors or with internal threats, and each conflict contributed to the development of Rome's identity as a fierce and resilient power. The early Republic's expansion into the Italian peninsula was marked by a series of military campaigns and strategic alliances that would lay the groundwork for Rome's future dominance. The Roman approach to warfare was methodical and disciplined, a reflection of the Republic's broader values of structure and organization. The Roman legions, with their strict hierarchy and rigorous training, were instrumental in ensuring the success of Rome's military campaigns. The Romans perfected the art of siege warfare, constructed roads and fortifications to support their armies, and employed innovative tactics that gave them an edge on the battlefield. And yet, it wasn't just Rome's military prowess that made it so formidable. It was the Romans' ability to integrate conquered peoples into their empire and to offer them a sense of belonging and participation. Roman citizenship, with all its privileges and protections, it became one of the most valuable prizes for those outside of Rome's borders. This system of incorporating people from various regions and cultures into the Roman fold would prove to be one of the most enduring aspects of Roman imperialism. As we lay the groundwork for Rome's future greatness, we also begin to see the roots of its eventual challenges. The Republic, though an impressive political system, was not immune to the tensions that arose from its growing wealth, power, and territorial expansion. These tensions, born from social inequalities and political strife, would eventually lead to the fall of the Republic and the rise of imperial rule. But before we reach that turning point, it's essential to understand the period of the Republic in all its complexities, its politics, its wars, and the values that guided its citizens. As we reflect on the origins of Rome, it is evident that the city's rise from a small settlement to a dominant power in the Mediterranean world was not the result of a single event or person, but the culmination of centuries of struggle, adaptation, and resilience. Rome's early years set the stage for the greatness that was to come, but also laid the foundations for the challenges it would face as it transitioned from a republic to an empire. As we move from Rome's legendary origins into the period of the Republic, we begin to see the structure and political life that would come to define the Roman state for centuries. This was an era of complex social systems, evolving governance, and military expansion, an era that would witness the rise of some of Rome's greatest heroes and the decline of its founding political institution. The Roman Republic was established in 509 BCE after the overthrow of the last Roman king, Tarquin the Proud. The decision to replace monarchy with a republic, a form of government based on elected officials and the rule of law, was pivotal in shaping the future of Rome. The Roman Republic was characterized by a delicate balance of power. Its political structure was a mixture of elements from various Greek and Etruscan sources, but it was distinct in its implementation. At its heart was the Senate, a body of patricians, the aristocratic class, who held significant influence over both domestic and foreign policy. However, the real innovation of the Roman Republic lay in the role of the consuls, two elected officials who served as the heads of state, each wielding imperium, or supreme authority, for 1 year. This system ensured that no single individual could hold absolute power for too long, a safeguard against the rise of tyranny. The Republic was a deeply oligarchic system, with power concentrated in the hands of the elite, yet it also allowed for the participation of the broader citizenry. The plebeians, the the lower class had limited political rights, but over time, through persistent struggle and political negotiation, they gained greater representation. This struggle for political power between the plebeians and the patricians is often referred to as the conflict of the orders, a series of struggles and reforms that would eventually see the plebeians achieve significant political gains. One of the most important reforms during this period was the creation of the 12 tables around 450 BCE. The 12 tables were the first written laws of Rome, codifying the legal rights of both patricians and plebeians, and ensuring that the law was not subject to arbitrary interpretation. These laws, which covered everything from property rights to criminal justice, laid the foundation for Roman legal theory and provided a model for legal systems throughout Western civilization. Despite its checks on power, the Roman Republic was not without its flaws. The political system, though designed to prevent any single individual from accumulating too much power, was often manipulated by wealthy and ambitious elites. Throughout the Republic's history, we see the rise of populist leaders who would use their influence to bypass traditional political structures and appeal directly to the masses. One such figure was Tiberius Gracchus, a tribune who sought land reforms to address the growing inequality between the rich and the poor. His efforts to redistribute land to the plebeians led to his assassination in 133 BCE, but they also sparked a series of populist movements that would further destabilize the Republic. As Rome grew in power, its military strength also became a key factor in its success. The Roman legions, disciplined and highly organized, were among the most formidable fighting forces in the ancient world. During the early Republic, Rome's military was based on a citizen-soldier model, where Roman citizens were required to serve in the military when needed. As Rome expanded, however, this model began to evolve. The military became more professionalized, with soldiers serving full-time and gaining greater loyalty to their generals than to the state. This shift in loyalty would become one of the Republic's most significant challenges. The Romans' expansion across the Italian peninsula was marked by a series of wars, each more brutal and far-reaching than the last. Perhaps the most notable of these were the Punic Wars, fought between Rome and the powerful city-state of Carthage. The First Punic War, 264 to 241 BCE, was primarily a naval conflict, but it set the stage for a protracted struggle for dominance in the Mediterranean. Rome's victory in this war gave it control of the strategic islands of Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica, marking the beginning of Rome's imperial ambitions. The Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BCE, however, would prove to be a defining moment in Roman history. Led by the Carthaginian general Hannibal, the war saw some of the most dramatic battles of the ancient world, including Hannibal's famous crossing of the Alps and his victory at the Battle of Cannae in 216 BCE. Despite these setbacks, the Romans demonstrated their resilience, eventually turning the tide of the war. The Roman general Scipio Africanus defeated Hannibal at the Battle of Zama in 22 BCE, securing Roman dominance over the Western Mediterranean. The Punic Wars were not just military struggles, but also profound political and social events that reshaped the Roman Republic. The immense costs of the wars and the subsequent expansion of Roman territory created a strain on the Republic's political structures. As Rome became more powerful, it also became more vulnerable to internal conflict. The Republic, originally designed for a smaller, more localized society, was ill-equipped to handle the complexities of an empire. By the 2nd century BCE, the Roman Republic was facing increasing internal strife. The rapid expansion of the empire had created a class of wealthy landowners who relied on slave labor, while the small farmers who had once been the backbone of Rome's military were being pushed off their land. This created a growing divide between the rich and the poor, with the plebeians growing discontented and the elite becoming increasingly powerful. It was during this period of unrest that powerful individuals began to rise. Individuals like Gaius Marius, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, and Julius Caesar, whose ambitions would signal the beginning of the end for the Roman Republic. Marius, a military reformer, expanded the Roman army to include the landless poor, creating a professional army that would be loyal not to the state, but to its commanders. Sulla, a general who marched on Rome itself, set a dangerous precedent by using military force to seize power. And Caesar, the most famous of them all, would eventually cross the Rubicon in 49 BCE and plunge Rome into a civil war, a war that would end with his rise as dictator. As we look back on the Roman Republic, we see a political system that was a remarkable experiment in governance, one that balanced the power of elected officials with the necessity of military strength. But the same features that made the Republic strong, its complex system of checks and balances, its reliance on civic duty, also made it vulnerable to corruption, inequality, and the ambitions of powerful individuals. These contradictions would lead to the Republic's downfall and the rise of imperial rule. In the end, the Roman Republic's story is one of both triumph and tragedy. It was an era that saw Rome's transformation from a small city-state to a dominant power in the Mediterranean world, but it was also a time when the seeds of empire and the dangers of autocracy were planted. The Republic's demise would set the stage for the rise of the Roman Empire, a transition that would irrevocably change the course of history. The Roman Republic's rise to power was largely shaped by the relentless and disciplined might of its military, an engine of conquest that drove the expansion of Rome's influence across the Mediterranean. As we look deeper into the structure, tactics, and strategies of the Roman military, we uncover the essential role it played not just in warfare, but in shaping Roman identity itself. The Roman army was not just a fighting force. It was an institution that cultivated loyalty, discipline, and civic duty. Its soldiers were more than warriors. They were Roman citizens, bound to the Republic by a sense of service and honor. In the early days of the Republic, the Roman military relied on the citizen-soldier model. Roman men who owned land were expected to serve in the military during times of war, and they fought in exchange for the promise of land and other rewards. This system helped to foster a deep sense of duty to the Republic, as soldiers fought not just for pay, but for the future of their own homes and families. Roman military service was seen as an essential part of Roman citizenship, and the discipline and loyalty of Roman soldiers became legendary. By the mid-Republic, however, the increasing demands of Rome's military campaigns necessitated a shift in this model. With more frequent and prolonged wars, especially in the wake of Rome's battles with the Greek and Carthaginian powers, the citizen-soldier model became unsustainable. The army transformed into a more professionalized force, where soldiers were recruited from the lower classes, many of whom had no land to speak of, and were enlisted for long-term service. This shift not only increased the size and efficiency of the Roman army, but also began to create a bond between soldiers and their generals, rather than the state itself. The transformation into a professional army had significant consequences. Roman generals, now able to offer their soldiers salaries and rewards in exchange for loyalty, became increasingly powerful. The relationship between general and soldier became personal, as soldiers were bound not to the Senate or the people of Rome, but to their commanders. This shift in allegiance would later play a central role in the decline of the Roman Republic, as powerful generals like Marius, Sulla, and Caesar sought to use their armies for political gain. At the core of the Roman military's success was its structure and organization. Roman legions were composed of around 4,000 to 6,000 men, divided into smaller units called cohorts and centuries, each led by a centurion. The Roman soldier was trained to fight in tight formations, relying on discipline and coordination to defeat enemies. The Roman legion's famous formation, the testudo, or tortoise, involved soldiers standing in close ranks, with shields raised in front and above to form an impenetrable wall. This formation was a testament to the discipline and teamwork that made the Roman legion so effective in battle. The Roman army's ability to adapt its tactics and strategies to different types of warfare was another key to its success. Roman soldiers were not only skilled in direct combat, but also in siege warfare, naval warfare, and guerrilla tactics. They were capable of adjusting their approach depending on the enemy they faced, whether it was the cavalry-heavy forces of the Carthaginians, the phalanx formations of the Greeks, or the nomadic tribes of Gaul. The Romans were also masters of engineering, able to construct forts, roads, and siege equipment with remarkable speed and efficiency, which allowed them to maintain their military campaigns across vast distances. One of the most famous military campaigns of the Republic, and one that showcases the Roman military's ingenuity and tenacity, was the Punic Wars. The conflict with Carthage, Rome's fiercest rival for dominance in the Mediterranean, spanned over a century and tested the limits of Rome's military strength. The First Punic War, 264–241 BCE, was fought primarily at sea, with Rome needing to develop a strong navy to counter the might of Carthage's fleet. The Romans, though inexperienced in naval warfare, rapidly adapted and built a formidable fleet, using innovative tactics like the corvus, a boarding device, to level the playing field against the Carthaginians. The Second Punic War, 218–201 BCE, however, is perhaps the most iconic chapter in Roman military history. The Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca's daring march across the Alps with his war elephants is one of the most dramatic feats of ancient warfare. Hannibal's victories at Cannae and Trebia were devastating for Rome, and the Roman Senate feared the collapse of the Republic. However, the Romans, ever resilient, did not falter. Under the leadership of Scipio Africanus, the Romans turned the tide at the Battle of Zama in 22 BCE, decisively defeating Hannibal and securing Rome's position as the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean. The success of the Roman army was not just due to its tactics, but also to its social and economic systems. The military's ability to extract resources from conquered territories through taxes, tribute, and the exploitation of enslaved peoples allowed Rome to fund its ongoing campaigns. The growth of Roman territories also created a vast network of roads, which facilitated the movement of troops and supplies across the empire. These roads, such as the famous Via Appia, became symbols of Roman engineering prowess and helped to solidify Rome's control over its far-flung territories. As Rome's military expanded, so too did its influence. By the end of the Second Punic War, Rome had emerged as the preeminent power in the Mediterranean. Rome's military might allowed it to conquer vast stretches of land, from Spain to Greece, from North Africa to the Near East. It was during this period of conquest that Rome began to transition from a republic focused on the Italian peninsula to an empire that stretched across much of the known world. But while the Roman military's victories were numerous, they came at a great cost. The constant wars required a steady flow of men and resources, leading to a growing sense of militarization within Roman society. The burden of warfare fell heavily on the plebeians, and as the legions expanded and professionalized, the social and economic fabric of Roman life began to shift. The wealth generated from conquest was concentrated in the hands of the elite, while the plebeians, many of whom had been displaced from their farms, found themselves living in poverty and becoming increasingly dissatisfied with the Republic's political system. The growing military influence would eventually contribute to the unraveling of the Roman Republic. Generals like Marius and Sulla seized power by marching their armies on Rome, setting dangerous precedents for military intervention in politics. Julius Caesar, the most famous of them all, would follow this path, crossing the Rubicon in 49 BCE and ultimately seizing control of Rome. This shift in the relationship between the army and the state signaled the end of the Roman Republic and the beginning of imperial rule. Yet, despite the eventual fall of the Republic, the legacy of the Roman army endures. The Roman legions were not just a tool of conquest, they were a symbol of Roman discipline, organization, and identity. They brought Roman law, culture, and governance to the farthest reaches of the empire, and their presence helped to maintain Roman power for centuries. The military innovations of the Romans, particularly their tactics and engineering skills, continue to influence modern military strategy to this day. As we reflect on the role of the Roman army in the Republic's rise, we recognize that it was more than just a military force. It was a central pillar of Rome's success, one that shaped not only the empire's borders, but its very character. The discipline, loyalty, and resilience of the Roman soldier are enduring qualities that continue to captivate historians and scholars, even after the fall of the empire. The Roman Republic, though once a beacon of political innovation and civic engagement, began to show signs of internal decay as its power grew. The Republic's fall was neither sudden nor inevitable, but resulted from a combination of military expansion, social unrest, political corruption, and the rise of powerful individuals who exploited the system for personal gain. This period of transformation, culminating in the eventual end of the Roman Republic, marked a significant turning point in history, a shift from a system of shared power to the emergence of imperial autocracy. The first signs of the Republic's fragility began with its rapid expansion. Rome, having conquered the Italian peninsula, set its sights on new territories, leading to further military campaigns, most notably in Spain, North Africa, and the Eastern Mediterranean. As the Republic's borders grew, so did its internal complexities. Conquered territories were often incorporated into Rome through alliances or direct control, and Rome's influence spread across a vast region. While these conquests brought wealth, they also increased tensions between the rich elite and the common people. The distribution of land and wealth became uneven, with the rich growing richer and the poor becoming increasingly marginalized. As Rome expanded, its military structure became more professionalized, and generals gained greater loyalty from their soldiers. With soldiers now serving under the direct command of generals rather than the state, the dynamics of Roman politics began to shift. Generals, once mere public servants, grew in power, cultivating private armies that followed their personal ambitions rather than the interests of the Republic. This growing power of military leaders was one of the key factors that led to the fall of the Republic. The early 2nd century BCE saw the rise of the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, who attempted to address the growing inequality between the rich and the poor. Tiberius, as tribune, sought to pass land reforms that would distribute land to the plebeians, ensuring that they could serve as soldiers and sustain themselves. Gaius, his younger brother, expanded these reforms to include grain subsidies and citizenship rights for Rome's allies. The aristocracy, fearful of losing their power and wealth, resisted these reforms, leading to violent clashes and ultimately the deaths of both brothers. The murder of Tiberius in 133 BCE and later Gaius in 121 BCE marked a critical moment in the Republic's history, as it signaled the inability of the political system to resolve conflicts peacefully. The Gracchi's reforms, though unsuccessful, laid the foundation for the populist movements that would continue to destabilize the Republic. In the wake of their deaths, the Senate and the aristocracy grew more entrenched in their opposition to any challenges to their power, while the plebeians grew increasingly disillusioned. In this environment, political factions became more polarized, and violence in the streets became a common occurrence as each side vied for control. As the 1st century BCE unfolded, the political instability of the Republic was compounded by military conflict. The rise of powerful generals, such as Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla, further disrupted the delicate balance of power. Marius, a general of plebeian origins, initiated military reforms that made the army more professional and more loyal to individual commanders than to the state. His reforms allowed the landless poor to join the army, providing them with wages and the promise of land after their service. This shift made soldiers more dependent on their generals, thus increasing the generals' power and influence. In the midst of these reforms, Sulla, a rival general, used his army to march on Rome in 88 BCE, a drastic and unprecedented action that set a dangerous precedent for future military leaders. After a brief period of civil war, Sulla emerged victorious and declared himself dictator, a title that had been used sparingly in the Republic for emergency situations. He used his newfound power to enact a series of constitutional reforms that weakened the power of the tribunes and enhanced the authority of the Senate, but his actions only deepened the divisions within Roman society. Sulla's dictatorship, though ultimately short-lived, demonstrated that military power could trump the traditional political processes of the Republic. The power struggle between generals and the Senate continued throughout the 1st century BCE, culminating in the rise of Julius Caesar. Caesar, who had built a successful military career in Gaul, used his popularity and the loyalty of his army to challenge the authority of the Senate. In 49 BCE, Caesar crossed the Rubicon River, famously declaring, "The die is cast." This act of defiance against the Senate precipitated a civil war that ended with Caesar's victory and his eventual appointment as Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life. Caesar's rise was the final blow to the Republic's political system, as it demonstrated that power could now be seized through military force rather than through the traditional channels of elected office. Despite his achievements, Caesar's reign was cut short. In 44 BCE, he was assassinated by a group of senators who feared his growing power and the end of the Republic. His death, however, did not restore the Republic. Instead, it triggered a new round of civil wars, with Caesar's supporters, led by his grandnephew Octavian, ultimately defeating his assassins. Octavian, later known as Augustus, would emerge as the undisputed ruler of Rome, marking the transition from the Roman Republic to the Roman Empire. The collapse of the Roman Republic can be attributed to a number of factors: the widening gap between the rich and the poor, the increasing militarization of politics, and the inability of the Senate to resolve internal conflicts contributed to the Republic's downfall. The growing power of generals who commanded personal loyalty from their troops undermined the traditional Republican system of checks and balances. Additionally, Rome's rapid expansion created new challenges that the Republic's political structure could not manage, as Rome was no longer a small city-state, but a sprawling empire with complex governance needs. The fall of the Republic was not a sudden collapse, but rather the culmination of decades of political, social, and military struggles. The Republic's demise marked the end of Rome's experiment with democracy and the beginning of imperial rule, which would reshape the course of Western history for centuries to come. The rise of Augustus, the first emperor, brought stability and order, but it also concentrated power in the hands of one man, signaling the end of the Roman Republic's experiment with shared power. In this transition from republic to empire, Rome moved from a system of collective rule to one of centralized autocracy, a shift that would have profound implications for the future of the Roman world. As we look back on the fall of the Roman Republic, we are reminded of the fragility of even the most powerful of systems. The Republic's collapse illustrates how social and political instability, unchecked ambition, and the changing nature of warfare can bring down even the most established institutions. It is a cautionary tale of how political systems must evolve and adapt in the face of new challenges, or risk being undone by the very forces they once sought to control. The death of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE did not mark the end of political instability in Rome, but instead set the stage for a dramatic transformation. Caesar's assassination, intended to restore the power of the Senate and the people, instead plunged the Republic into another round of civil war. The true end of the Roman Republic and the dawn of the Roman Empire came not through an act of violence, but through the careful consolidation of power by a young and ambitious man, Octavian, later known as Augustus. Born Gaius Octavius Thurinus in 63 BCE, Octavian was the grandnephew of Julius Caesar, and after Caesar's death, was named in his will as his heir. His claim to power was tenuous at best. He was young, inexperienced, and lacked the military prowess of his rivals, Mark Antony and Lepidus, both of whom had been loyal supporters of Caesar. However, Octavian possessed a remarkable blend of political acumen, strategic foresight, and an unyielding ambition that would propel him to the highest echelons of power. In the aftermath of Caesar's death, Rome was engulfed in another series of civil wars as factions vied for control of the state. Mark Antony, Caesar's ally and general, initially seemed the most powerful of the three men vying for control. However, his relationship with Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, would prove to be his undoing. Antony's increasing dependence on Cleopatra alienated many Romans, who saw his actions as a betrayal of Rome's interests. Octavian, positioning himself as the defender of Roman values and the rightful heir to Caesar's legacy, capitalized on this sentiment. His forces decisively defeated Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, leading to their suicides and securing Octavian's absolute control over Rome. In 27 BCE, Octavian presented himself not as a monarch, but as the restorer of the Republic, offering to relinquish his extraordinary powers and return Rome to its traditional republican system. However, the Senate, seeing the instability and chaos that had followed the fall of the Republic, granted him supreme authority in exchange for the promise of stability. Octavian was given the title of Augustus, meaning the revered one, and effectively became the first Roman emperor. Though he maintained the outward appearance of the Republic, Augustus wielded unprecedented power as the first among equals, or princeps, marking the beginning of a new era, the Roman Empire. Augustus's reign ushered in a period of relative peace and stability known as the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, which lasted for over 2 centuries. During this time, Augustus implemented a series of reforms that strengthened the empire both politically and militarily. He reorganized the army, establishing a professional standing force of soldiers who served for long terms and received a pension. This professionalization of the military, combined with Augustus's establishment of a loyal imperial bureaucracy, helped to ensure the stability of the empire long after his reign. One of Augustus's most significant achievements was his ability to bring order to a Rome that had been torn apart by years of civil war. He reformed the tax system, restructured the government, and enacted laws that promoted morality and public welfare. Augustus also sought to strengthen Roman culture by reviving traditional religious practices, funding public works projects, and sponsoring the arts. The period of his rule saw the construction of some of Rome's most iconic buildings, including the Forum of Augustus, the Areopagus, Altar of Peace, and the expansion of the Roman road system. These monumental projects were both symbols of Augustus's power and his commitment to the prosperity of the Roman people. The reign of Augustus marked the beginning of the Roman Empire's expansion and consolidation. While the Republic had been a patchwork of alliances and client states, the empire under Augustus was a more centralized and bureaucratic system. Augustus's control over the military and the provinces ensured that Rome's borders remained secure, and during his reign, the empire expanded to its greatest territorial extent. The provinces of Hispania, Gaul, and Egypt were firmly under Roman control, while Rome's influence stretched into the distant reaches of Mesopotamia, Britain, and North Africa. Augustus's reign also saw the expansion of Roman culture. The arts flourished during this time, with poets such as Virgil, Ovid, and Horace creating works that would become pillars of Western literature. Augustus used the arts to promote his image and the ideals of the Roman Empire, commissioning works that glorified Rome's past and celebrated its imperial destiny. Virgil's Aeneid, for example, not only provided a mythical origin story for Rome, linking it to the ancient Trojans, but also served as a propaganda tool for Augustus, reinforcing his claim to be Rome's divinely ordained leader. Despite his many successes, Augustus's reign was not without challenges. Though he enjoyed popular support, his rule was not universally accepted. Some members of the Senate were wary of his increasing power and the erosion of the traditional Republican values that they had once fought to protect. Augustus navigated these challenges through careful diplomacy, rewarding his supporters while marginalizing his detractors. His ability to balance the interests of the elite with the desires of the masses allowed him to maintain control over Rome for the entirety of his life. The transition from republic to empire under Augustus was a momentous event, not only for Rome, but for the world. Augustus created a political system that would endure for centuries, with later emperors inheriting the institutions and practices that he established. The empire he founded would go on to dominate the Mediterranean world for nearly 500 years, leaving behind a legacy that still influences political, cultural, and social structures today. The principles of Roman law, governance, and military organization became foundational for many Western civilizations, and the idea of empire, rooted in Augustus's vision, would echo through the rise of empires throughout history. As we look back at the rise of the Roman Empire, it is clear that Augustus's rule was not just the result of military might or political manipulation, but also the product of a deep understanding of Rome's history, culture, and values. He was not just a conqueror, but a statesman who understood the necessity of creating lasting stability. His ability to transform a broken republic into a thriving empire demonstrated the power of political vision and the resilience of Roman identity. The legacy of Augustus, the first emperor, would shape not only Rome's future, but also the future of the Western world. As we journey deeper into the Roman Empire, it is essential to understand not just the political and military structures that held the empire together, but the lives of the individuals who inhabited this vast and diverse world. The Roman Empire was an extraordinary civilization, one that stretched from the wind-swept islands of Britain in the north to the sun-baked deserts of Egypt in the south, and from the plains of Mesopotamia in the east to the rocky coasts of Hispania in the west. Within this expanse, people of different cultures, languages, and religions lived together under the banner of Roman rule. At the heart of Roman life was the family. The Roman family was an essential building block of society, with the father, paterfamilias, holding absolute authority over his household. His power was vast. He could make decisions on behalf of his wife, children, slaves, and even extended family members. The paterfamilias was responsible for ensuring the moral and financial well-being of his family, and his authority extended even to the life and death of his children. The family was not only a personal unit, but also a social and political one, with Roman citizens often relying on familial connections to navigate the complex Roman political system. Roman women, though often relegated to domestic roles, had more freedom and influence than their counterparts in many other ancient societies. While women could not vote or hold political office, they were crucial to the functioning of the Roman household. Elite Roman women, especially those in the upper classes, had significant influence over their husbands and could wield power behind the scenes. Some women, like Livia Drusilla, the wife of Emperor Augustus, managed to exert their authority in the political sphere without ever officially holding office. While Roman women were expected to maintain their dignity and virtue, they also participated in social and religious life, attending public festivals and organizing charitable activities. In contrast, the lower classes, particularly the plebeians, faced harsher realities. Most plebeians were farmers, craftsmen, or laborers, living in crowded and often unsanitary conditions. These individuals, who made up the majority of Rome's population, had limited access to the wealth and privileges enjoyed by the elite. Many plebeians lived in multi-story apartment buildings called insulae, which were often cramped and prone to fires. Despite their modest circumstances, the plebeians played a crucial role in the maintenance of Roman society, providing the labor that kept the city running. The grain dole, a state-subsidized distribution of food, was one way the Roman government tried to alleviate some of the hardships faced by the lower classes, although it was also used as a tool for political control by populist leaders. At the other end of the social spectrum were the elite Romans, the patricians, and equestrians. These individuals enjoyed vast wealth, owning large estates in the countryside and frequently occupying high-ranking positions in the military and government. The patricians were the aristocratic class, with their ancestry often tracing back to Rome's earliest days. They held most of the political power and were the primary benefactors of Rome's expansion. The equestrians, or knights, were a wealthy class just below the patricians, many of whom had made their fortunes in trade, business, or the military. While the equestrians were not as politically influential as the patricians, they still wielded significant economic power. The Roman economy, particularly in the capital, was fueled by trade, agriculture, and slavery. Rome was a bustling city of over 1 million inhabitants, making it one of the largest urban centers in the ancient world. Its marketplaces, or forums, were the heart of commercial activity. The Romans traded goods across their vast empire: grain from Egypt, wine from Gaul, olive oil from Hispania, and luxury goods from the East. Slavery was a central part of Roman society, and slaves were used in nearly every aspect of daily life, from working in the fields to serving in wealthy households, or even performing administrative tasks in the government. Slavery was not based on race. Rather, slaves were often prisoners of war, criminals, or individuals who had fallen into debt. Roman cities, including the capital itself, were marvels of engineering and urban planning. Roman architecture was known for its grandeur and functionality. Public buildings, such as the baths, theaters, temples, and amphitheaters, were designed not only for practical use, but to project the power and glory of Rome. The Colosseum, for example, was not only a place for gladiatorial combat, but also a symbol of Rome's might and cultural sophistication. The Roman baths, with their elaborate heating systems, were an essential part of daily life and served as places for relaxation, socialization, and even political discourse. These baths were accessible to people from all walks of life, and they were one of the few places where the lower classes could enjoy luxuries that were otherwise reserved for the elite. The Roman road system was another marvel of engineering, designed to connect the vast expanse of the empire. These roads allowed for the rapid movement of armies, officials, and goods, making the Roman Empire one of the most interconnected civilizations of the ancient world. Roads like the Via Appia, which stretched from Rome to the southern regions of Italy, were meticulously constructed and remained in use for centuries after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Religion played a central role in Roman life, with the Romans believing that the favor of the gods was crucial to the success of their state. The Roman pantheon was rich and varied, with gods and goddesses representing every aspect of life, from war and agriculture to love and wisdom. While many of these deities were adopted from Greek mythology, the Romans also maintained their own unique religious practices. Priests, augurs, and soothsayers performed rituals to interpret the will of the gods and ensure the prosperity of the empire. Public rituals, such as sacrifices, processions, and festivals, were an integral part of Roman civic life. The most significant change to Roman religious practice came with the rise of Christianity in the 1st century CE. Christianity, initially a small sect within Judaism, spread throughout the Roman Empire, eventually becoming the state religion under Emperor Constantine in the 4th century CE. The adoption of Christianity brought about profound changes in Roman religious and social life, marking the beginning of the transition from the ancient Roman world to the Christian Middle Ages. Life in the Roman Empire was multifaceted and complex, shaped by social class, geography, and political power. While the elite enjoyed wealth and luxury, the majority of the population lived in more modest conditions, with the plebeians and slaves contributing greatly to the empire's success. Despite the disparities in wealth and power, Roman society was bound by a common identity, centered around shared values of loyalty, duty, and respect for tradition. These values, reinforced by the family, the military, and the state, helped to maintain Roman stability for centuries. As we look at the diversity of Roman life, it is clear that the empire was more than just a political entity. It was a vibrant society where people from all walks of life interacted, worked, and coexisted. The lasting influence of Roman culture is still felt today, from our legal systems to our architecture, from our language to our notions of citizenship and governance. The Roman Empire's success was not only due to its military prowess and political organization, but also to its cultural achievements, which have had a profound and lasting influence on the modern world. Roman culture, while deeply rooted in the traditions of its predecessors, such as the Etruscans and the Greeks, developed its own distinctive characteristics that were reflected in its art, architecture, literature, and philosophy. As the empire expanded, it absorbed and adapted ideas from across the Mediterranean world, creating a unique synthesis that laid the foundation for much of Western civilization. One of the most enduring aspects of Roman culture is its architecture. The Romans were master builders, and their contributions to architecture have left a lasting imprint on the world. One of the most significant innovations was the use of concrete, which allowed the Romans to create large, durable structures that could withstand the test of time. The Roman arch, vault, and dome were revolutionary architectural techniques that enabled the construction of monumental buildings, such as the Pantheon, the Colosseum, and the aqueducts. The Pantheon, completed during the reign of Emperor Hadrian in the 2nd century CE, is a remarkable example of Roman architectural ingenuity. Its massive dome, made of concrete, remains the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world today. The structure was designed to symbolize the vastness and power of the Roman Empire, with the oculus at the center of the dome representing the connection between the heavens and the earth. The Colosseum, another iconic Roman structure, is a testament to Roman engineering and the grandeur of public spectacles. It could hold up to 50,000 spectators and was the site of gladiatorial games, animal hunts, and mock naval battles. Roman engineering was not limited to monumental buildings. The Romans were also responsible for the construction of an extensive network of roads, bridges, and aqueducts that connected the farthest reaches of the empire. Roman roads were built to last, with layers of stone, gravel, and concrete, and they facilitated trade, military movement, and communication across the empire. The famous Via Appia, which connected Rome to the southern regions of Italy, was one of the first and most important Roman roads. Roman aqueducts, such as the Aqua Appia and Aqua Claudia, brought fresh water to the cities, supplying public baths, fountains, and private homes. These engineering marvels improved the quality of life for Roman citizens and ensured the empire's prosperity. In addition to their architectural achievements, the Romans made significant contributions to the arts, particularly in sculpture and painting. Roman sculpture was heavily influenced by Greek art, but the Romans added their own innovations, particularly in portraiture. Roman portraiture is known for its attention to detail and realism, capturing the individual features and expressions of the subjects. This focus on realism reflected the Roman value of verism, which emphasized the importance of age, experience, and wisdom. Portraits of emperors, senators, and other important figures were displayed in public places and homes, serving as symbols of power and authority. Roman painting, though less well-preserved than sculpture, also flourished during the empire. The frescoes found in the villas of Pompeii and Herculaneum provide a glimpse into Roman domestic life and artistic tastes. These frescoes often depicted mythological scenes, landscapes, and everyday activities, providing valuable insight into Roman culture. Roman mosaics, made from small pieces of colored glass, stone, or ceramic, adorned the floors of public buildings and private homes. These intricate works of art often depicted scenes from daily life, mythological figures, or animals. The Romans were also renowned for their literature and philosophy, much of which continues to shape Western thought today. Roman literature was heavily influenced by Greek works, but the Romans added their own unique contributions. The epic poem Aeneid, written by the poet Virgil in the 1st century BCE, is one of the most important works of Roman literature. The Aeneid tells the story of Aeneas, a Trojan hero and the legendary ancestor of the Romans, who travels to Italy and founds the city of Rome. The Aeneid not only provides a mythological origin story for Rome, but also reflects Roman values, such as duty, sacrifice, and the importance of the state. In addition to epic poetry, the Romans produced works of history, philosophy, and rhetoric. The historian Livy wrote Ab Urbe Condita, a monumental history of Rome from its founding to the reign of Augustus, which remains one of the most important sources for early Roman history. The philosopher Seneca, a Stoic, wrote numerous essays and letters on ethics, emphasizing the importance of self-control and virtue in the face of adversity. Roman rhetoric, exemplified by figures such as Cicero, was highly valued and formed the basis for the education of Roman citizens. Cicero's speeches and writings on politics and philosophy were influential in shaping the intellectual landscape of both the Republic and the Empire. Roman law is another of the empire's greatest legacies. The Romans developed a sophisticated legal system that has influenced modern legal frameworks across the world. The 12 Tables, created in the 5th century BCE, were Rome's first written laws and laid the foundation for Roman legal practice. Later, the Corpus Juris Civilis, body of civil law, compiled under Emperor Justinian in the 6th century CE, became the cornerstone of legal systems in many European countries. Roman law emphasized concepts such as property rights, contracts, and civil liberties, and its principles are still found in modern legal systems. Roman philosophy, while influenced by Greek thinkers, also produced significant original works. The Stoic school of philosophy, with its emphasis on virtue, self-control, and the acceptance of fate, was particularly influential in Rome. Philosophers like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, the latter of whom was also a Roman emperor, wrote extensively on Stoic principles. Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, a series of personal reflections, remains a seminal work on Stoic thought and is widely read even today. The Romans also made contributions to science and medicine, although their understanding of the natural world was still limited by the knowledge of their time. Roman engineers developed innovations in water management, agriculture, and construction, and figures such as Galen made important advances in the field of medicine. Galen, a Greek physician who worked in Rome, became the most influential medical thinker of antiquity, and his writings were referenced for centuries. Roman culture was not static, but evolved over time as the empire expanded and encountered new peoples and ideas. The Romans were adept at assimilating the cultures of the regions they conquered, blending them with their own traditions. This cultural syncretism allowed for the flourishing of a cosmopolitan empire where diverse cultures, languages, and religions coexisted. However, as we will see in later sections, the growing complexity and diversity of the empire also contributed to the challenges it faced in the centuries to come. As we reflect on the cultural achievements of the Roman Empire, it is clear that its legacy is not confined to its military conquests or its political structures. The Romans left an indelible mark on art, architecture, literature, law, and philosophy, and their influence continues to shape the world today. The grandeur of Roman achievements, from the engineering marvels of their roads and aqueducts to the literary masterpieces of Virgil and Cicero, serves as a testament to the enduring legacy of one of the greatest civilizations in human history. As we transition from the flourishing days of the Pax Romana, the Roman Empire entered a period of profound instability and crisis in the 3rd century CE. The empire, which had long been a beacon of stability and strength, faced a series of challenges that threatened to undo everything that had been built in previous centuries. The crisis of the 3rd century was a time marked by internal strife, military upheaval, and economic turmoil. It was an era that tested the resilience of the Roman state, forcing it to confront challenges from within and from without. One of the primary causes of this crisis was the sheer size and complexity of the Roman Empire. At its height, the empire stretched from the British Isles in the west to the borders of Persia in the east, from the Rhine and Danube in the north to Egypt in the south. Managing such an expansive territory, with its diverse peoples and cultures, became increasingly difficult. The empire's borders were constantly under threat, both from barbarian invasions and from more organized military powers like the Persian Sasanian Empire in the east. The Roman military, which had been one of the empire's greatest strengths, began to show signs of strain as it struggled to defend such vast territories. In addition to external threats, the Roman Empire was also facing significant internal issues. Political instability was rampant, with a series of short-lived emperors and military coups undermining the authority of the imperial throne. The once stable system of succession, which had been established under Augustus, was now in disarray. Emperors were often chosen by their military legions rather than by any clear process of election or inheritance, and this led to frequent power struggles and civil wars. Many emperors ruled only for a few years, and several were assassinated or died in battle. This lack of stability in leadership created an environment of constant uncertainty and weakened the overall cohesion of the empire. Perhaps the most striking feature of the crisis of the 3rd century was the rise of regional powers that splintered off from the empire. In the west, the Roman provinces of Britain, Gaul, and Hispania formed what came to be known as the Gallic Empire, 260 to 274 CE, effectively breaking away from the central authority of Rome. At the same time, the eastern provinces, including Egypt and the eastern Mediterranean, formed the Palmyrene Empire under Queen Zenobia. These breakaway states not only challenged Roman authority, but also led to the weakening of the Roman economy and the military as resources were diverted to suppress these rebellions. The Roman economy also faced a series of shocks during this period. A combination of heavy taxation, inflation, and a breakdown in trade networks contributed to a severe economic decline. The empire's reliance on slave labor, particularly in agriculture, made it difficult to adapt to changing economic conditions. With fewer conquests to provide new sources of slaves, the empire's labor force stagnated. At the same time, the costs of maintaining a large standing army, especially during the continuous conflicts along the frontiers, drained the imperial treasury. These economic stresses contributed to widespread poverty, social unrest, and a general sense of decline. The military, once the backbone of Roman power, also began to show signs of dysfunction. The recruitment of soldiers became increasingly dependent on non-Roman mercenaries, many of whom had little loyalty to the empire. These mercenaries, often from barbarian tribes such as the Goths, Franks, and Vandals, were more concerned with their pay than with defending Roman interests. As the empire's reliance on these mercenaries grew, the loyalty of the army shifted from the state to individual generals, further undermining imperial authority. In some cases, generals used their private armies to seize power, leading to a pattern of military coups and short-lived emperors. Despite these challenges, the Roman Empire did not collapse during the crisis of the 3rd century. Instead, it underwent a process of transformation and adaptation. The eventual resolution of this crisis came through the efforts of Emperor Diocletian, who rose to power in 284 CE and took dramatic steps to restore stability to the empire. Diocletian's reforms were multifaceted and addressed both the internal and external challenges that the empire faced. He recognized that the sheer size of the Roman Empire made it unmanageable as a single entity and therefore divided the empire into 2 parts: the Eastern Roman Empire and the Western Roman Empire. Diocletian himself took control of the eastern half, while his co-emperor, Maximian, governed the west. This division of power was meant to make the empire more manageable, and it allowed each region to focus on its own specific needs and challenges. Diocletian also implemented significant reforms in the military, increasing the size of the army and reorganizing it to better defend against external threats. He fortified the empire's borders, especially along the Rhine and Danube, and established a system of mobile field armies that could quickly respond to threats wherever they arose. These reforms helped to stabilize the empire and push back against the invasions that had plagued Rome during the previous decades. In addition to military reforms, Diocletian addressed the economic challenges facing the empire. He introduced a new system of taxation that was more efficient and aimed at reducing the empire's economic instability. Diocletian also attempted to stabilize the currency, which had been ravaged by inflation. His efforts to control the economy, however, were not entirely successful, and inflation remained a persistent issue throughout the empire. Diocletian's reign also marked a shift in religious policy. While the Roman Empire had long been religiously pluralistic, with a variety of gods and religious practices coexisting, Diocletian sought to restore the traditional Roman religion and suppress the rise of Christianity, which had been growing in influence throughout the empire. In the early 4th century CE, Diocletian launched a series of persecutions against Christians, culminating in the infamous Great Persecution from 303 to 311 CE. These efforts, however, were ultimately unsuccessful, and Christianity would go on to become the dominant religion of the empire under Emperor Constantine. The legacy of Diocletian's reforms was mixed. While his efforts helped to stabilize the empire and ensure its survival for a time, the division of the empire into eastern and western halves set the stage for future divisions. The Western Roman Empire, though strengthened by Diocletian's reforms, continued to face external pressures from barbarian invasions, and by the 5th century CE, it would collapse under the weight of these invasions. The Eastern Roman Empire, however, would continue to thrive for another 1,000 years, eventually becoming known as the Byzantine Empire. The crisis of the 3rd century was a defining moment in Roman history. It exposed the vulnerabilities of the empire and forced it to adapt in ways that would alter its trajectory forever. While the crisis did not lead to the immediate collapse of the empire, it marked the beginning of a new era, one characterized by profound political and social changes. The resilience of the Roman Empire during this turbulent period demonstrated its capacity for adaptation, but the seeds of its eventual division and decline had already been sown. As we reflect on this period, we are reminded of the complexities of empire, how external pressures, internal instability, and the failure to adapt can lead even the mightiest of civilizations to face existential challenges. The crisis of the 3rd century was a testament to the resilience of the Roman Empire, but it also set the stage for the eventual transformation of the Roman world, culminating in the division between East and West, and the emergence of the Byzantine Empire. The final chapter in the history of the Roman Empire is both tragic and transformative. The fall of the Western Roman Empire, traditionally dated to 476 CE, marks one of the most significant events in world history, as it signaled the end of classical antiquity and the beginning of the Middle Ages in Europe. While the Eastern Roman Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, continued for nearly 1,000 years after the fall of the West, the collapse of the Western Empire reshaped the political, cultural, and economic landscape of Europe for centuries to come. The fall of the Western Roman Empire was not a sudden event, but a long process, one that unfolded over several centuries. The empire, which had once been the most powerful state in the Mediterranean world, faced a series of internal and external challenges that ultimately led to its downfall. Among the key factors contributing to the empire's collapse were political instability, economic decline, military pressures, and the rise of barbarian kingdoms. Political instability was one of the key factors that weakened the Western Roman Empire in its final centuries. After the division of the empire in 395 CE into the Western and Eastern Roman empires, the Western Roman Empire was often ruled by weak and ineffective emperors who were unable to address the growing challenges faced by the state. The emperors of the West were frequently chosen by military factions or by political elites, rather than through a clear and stable system of succession. This led to a high turnover of rulers and, in many cases, to civil war and internal strife. The lack of strong leadership made it difficult for the Western Roman Empire to respond effectively to the mounting pressures it faced both from within and beyond its borders. In addition to political instability, the Western Roman Empire faced significant economic difficulties. The empire's economy had long been based on a system of taxation, tribute, and slavery, but by the 5th century CE, these economic foundations began to deteriorate. A combination of factors, including inflation, heavy taxation, and the burden of maintaining a large military, placed immense strain on the imperial treasury. The empire's reliance on slave labor also began to undermine its agricultural and industrial productivity, as the supply of slaves from conquered territories dwindled. With fewer new resources to extract from conquered lands, the Roman economy stagnated, leading to widespread poverty and a decline in trade. As the empire's internal problems mounted, external pressures grew even more formidable. The Western Roman Empire's borders were under constant threat from barbarian invasions. Over the course of the 4th and 5th centuries, various barbarian groups, including the Visigoths, Vandals, Huns, and Franks, pressed against the empire's frontiers, seeking to exploit its weaknesses. These groups had long been a source of pressure on the empire, but during the 4th and 5th centuries, they became more organized and aggressive. One of the most dramatic events in the decline of the Western Roman Empire occurred in 410 CE, when the Visigoths, led by King Alaric, sacked Rome. This event was a shock to the Roman world, as it had been over 800 years since the city of Rome had been captured by an enemy. While the Visigoths had been pushing into Roman territory for some time, their sacking of Rome marked a symbolic turning point in the decline of the empire. The sack of Rome shattered the illusion of Roman invincibility and demonstrated that the empire, once thought to be impervious to external threats, was vulnerable to barbarian invasions. Following the Visigothic sack of Rome, the empire continued to weaken, and its ability to defend itself became increasingly compromised. In 455 CE, the Vandals, another barbarian group, sacked Rome once again, adding further insult to the empire's injuries. While these invasions were devastating, the Western Roman Empire had already been in decline for decades. The final blow came in 476 CE, when the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the barbarian general Odoacer. Odoacer, a member of the Germanic Heruli tribe, assumed control of the western part of the empire, marking the official end of the Western Roman Empire. While the fall of the Western Roman Empire marked the end of the ancient Roman state in the West, it was not the end of Roman influence. The legacy of Rome lived on in the Eastern Roman Empire, which would become known as the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire, with its capital at Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, continued to preserve and adapt Roman law, culture, and governance for nearly 1,000 years after the fall of the West. Even after the fall of Constantinople in 1453 CE, Roman law and customs continued to influence European societies, particularly in the development of legal and governmental systems. In addition to the continuation of Roman traditions in the East, the fall of the Western Roman Empire also led to the formation of new political entities in Europe. The barbarian groups that had invaded the Western Empire, such as the Franks, Visigoths, and Ostrogoths, eventually settled in the former Roman territories and established their own kingdoms. These kingdoms, while influenced by Roman culture, also introduced new elements of Germanic law and governance. The Frankish kingdom, under the leadership of Clovis I, emerged as the dominant power in Western Europe in the 5th and 6th centuries, laying the foundation for the future Carolingian Empire. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire also had profound social and cultural implications. The fall of centralized Roman authority led to a period of fragmentation and instability in the West. The decline of urban centers and the collapse of trade networks marked the beginning of what is often referred to as the Dark Ages. However, this period was not devoid of cultural and intellectual activity. Christianity, which had become the dominant religion in the Roman Empire by the 4th century CE, played a central role in preserving knowledge and culture during the early medieval period. Monasteries became centers of learning, and the Christian church helped to maintain a sense of continuity and stability in an otherwise turbulent time. The fall of the Western Roman Empire was not the end of the Roman idea. Rather, it was the beginning of a new chapter in European history. The legacy of Rome, its political institutions, its law, its culture, and its religion, continued to shape the Western world for centuries to come. The idea of a unified Roman Empire would resurface in various forms throughout European history, from the Holy Roman Empire to the modern concept of European integration. As we look back on the fall of the Western Roman Empire, we are reminded of the complexities of empire building and the fragility of even the most powerful states. The causes of Rome's decline were multifaceted, involving both internal weaknesses and external threats. Yet, despite its collapse, the Roman Empire left behind a legacy that shaped the course of Western civilization. The lessons of Rome, its triumphs and its failures, continue to resonate today, serving as both an inspiration and a cautionary tale for modern societies.